Hello and welcome to Get Out the Bet, the show with all you need to know about betting on politics. Now, if you are betting on politics, you're probably somewhere in Europe where that's legal. It is not yet permissible in the United States, but doesn't mean we cannot talk about it. I'm Melissa Caen. I'm a political analyst and a journalist, and I'm here as always with our betting experts, Paul Krishnamurty from thepoliticalgambler.com, who is a jet-setting world traveler and is in Turkey right now, where his internet may be a little spotty. So we are going to do our best, and if there are any issues, please forgive us. We'll figure it out. Also, we've got Patrick Everson, a senior reporter from VegasInsider, with us. Now, today we're going to talk about market movers. That is, the betting odds that have changed since last week. We're going to zero in on that Pennsylvania Senate race after last night's debate, and then we're going to move to Republicans in some House races before we get to our final picks of the week. So let's get started with Paul telling us the market movers.
Okay, so major drama today on the markets following the Pennsylvania debate last night and what was generally perceived as a bit of a disaster for John Fetterman. So remember that most Europeans were asleep while this was ongoing, so the market's been a bit of all over the place. Pre-debate, Mehmet Oz was 51% to win Pennsylvania. His odds then peaked at 62%. They've fallen back to 57% since, but he's clear favourite. Now, connected to that is the main market on Betfair for which party controls the Senate. Now, a week ago, Republicans were at 51%. They are now at 62%. Prior to the debate, they were 59%. That's gone further. Also, the same trend we reported last week, and again here, the Republicans strengthening. In Arizona Senate, the Democrats are still favourites, but Mark Kelly is down to 58% from 62%. In Georgia, Raphael Warnock is down to 56% favourite from 58%. One market on the House that I mentioned last week, I think was lagging, was the Republicans were 84% to win that. They're now up to 91% to get a majority in the House. And on the governor's races, one slight move the other way is Ron DeSantis, following his debate against Charlie Crist, has fallen to 90% from 95% favourite. Still overwhelming favourite, but that might say something about his 2024 chances. In Kansas, Republicans are up to 58% and 55%. In New Mexico, the Democrats, who were overwhelming favourites at 85%, Michelle Lujan Grisham, that's down to 78%. And in Oregon, which we discussed last week, the Republicans now clear favourites at 58% from 51% last week. Also, finally, another move here, Gretchen Whitmer, still overwhelming favourite in Michigan, but she was 91% favourite, down to 90%. And in Nevada, Republicans up to 67 from 60%. So pretty much the same trend everywhere.
Well, I do want to ask you a quick sort of, and Patrick, maybe you can chime in on this as well, a sort of straight betting question, which is it worth betting? Let's say you've got a candidate like a Ron DeSantis, who's just overwhelming favorite to win, and he's in the 90s. Is it worth betting on just to get that, 9%, I want to say return, but that's probably not the right word. But you know what I mean? Like maybe to bet a lot of money on a pretty sure bet and just get that marginal return, which seems, pretty safe. Is that a betting strategy that you guys have employed or would recommend?
I would, yeah. I mean, if I bet on sport, I'm very wary of betting short odds. And I'm generally not into betting short odds just because things go wrong. But some of these are the best bets in politics. I mean, just as an example, that bet on the Republicans to win the House last week. Well, I was just saying, if you're going to pay 67% in a competitive Senate race, right, that's not clear at all, why not just pay 84% for the House? That's probably a certainty. And likewise, in that Senate market, the Democrat majority, which actually on Betfair's rules involves them getting 53 seats. Right, so a whole series of wins. That's been a cheap sell. The same thing. That's been, you can still sell it at 7% now, and that just looks like free money to me. Famous last words, I know, because miracles do happen, but I think so.
No,
And Patrick, did you get a look at any of that debate? And sorry, you can.
I did. Let me back up to just what you were asking about, though. No, I mean, a lot of very savvy, sharp bettors in sport or sports, is, you know, as Paul alluded to, and I'm certain, and Paul's probably done this in the political realm too, and so I'm sure Paul's done this in the political realm, and others probably have too. You know, that little bit of ROI is totally worthwhile. A lot of you know, when you're looking at something that seems like more of a long shot, the more recreational bettor might take a long shot, especially in a sporting event, because you can bet a little to win a lot, but the likelihood of that occurrence is very small. So if you take the other side of that, especially if you can get what you feel is a reasonable enough number, value is in the eye of the bettor. And we talked a little bit about this last week, how bettors determine what's valuable and what's not. You know, you might be taking a minus price, meaning let's say DeSantis is, I'm not sure what his percentage, you know, or what his odds would be specifically right now, but let's say he's minus 300 to win the governor of Florida, just as a round, easy number example, in U.S. odds. So that would mean you would need to bet $300 to win $100. His odds are probably even shorter, probably long, possibly even longer than that. But you'd have to bet 300 to win 100. But that's 33% ROI. And I think Paul would agree. You know, the savvy bettors look at that and think that's very good ROI, and they may even think it at six. If let's say he's minus 600. Well, 600 to win 100.
It's 900.
That's still really good. Yeah. So he's
yeah,
way up there.
It's 900, but
it's still maybe 10% ROI, right?
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah.
900 to win $100, you get 9% ROI. So a lot of savvy bettors do look at it. Is that fair to say, Paul, that a lot of savvy bettors do look at it that way? Minus 600, minus 900. A good equivalency might be, if you wanted to put it in sports terms for people who are watching, you might recall a few years back, Conor McGregor, who was an MMA, a mixed martial arts UFC guy, went to the ring in a boxing match against Floyd Mayweather. And Floyd Mayweather's number was huge. It was like minus 600, minus 700, whatever. And all the savvy guys were on Mayweather at that big minus price, looking at it as a slam. They felt it was a slam dunk, you know, and I think it was pretty much. And B, that the ROI merited it as well, even though, you know, the average bettor would look at this and say, what, I've got to bet $600 to win $100. They're not thinking about the, you know, the very strong likelihood of A, that this is going to happen, and B, that the ROI is, you know, 10% or whatever, which is not bad ROI at all.
Yeah, also, I mean, I just say we're dealing with politics again. This is another advantage of political betting. This isn't sport. We're not going to hit the crossbar 4 times. You know, our players aren't going to get sent off, right? You know, 1 million voters aren't going to all get stuck in traffic and not make it to the polls. It's just not going to happen, right? There's no luck involved in this. If you bet DeSantis for Florida at minus 900 and he loses, well, you've got to take it on the chin. It's one of those things you got completely wrong, but I don't know anyone seriously suggesting that he's not going to win.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it certainly could combat some of the inflation, maybe that some people are feeling the pinch about, which, you know, may be contributing to some of the political moves we're actually seeing here as we get closer to the final. I don't even want to say election day anymore, because there's so much absentee ballot voting to say the final election day instead of election day at this point. Now, I don't know about y'all, but I tuned in last night to watch the debate between Dr. Oz and John Fetterman, and it was really uncomfortable. It was, you know, I'm not sure it was fatal to Fetterman's campaign, but it was, there was something to see there. Let's say that, like the notion that, oh, there's nothing to see here, that it's ableist to even question whether or not he's capable of John Fetterman is capable of continuing to go on to be a senator is just wrong. Anybody who watched that debate has to see how uncomfortable that was and strange it was to watch. And so, Paul, as you pointed out, the markets really reacted very quickly to that sort of initially, and then kind of pulled back a little. You want to talk about that?
Look, I think that the market obviously saw that.
We're a little bouncy.
Okay, it looks like we're having some connectivity issues with Paul there. Patrick, did you get a look at any of the maybe the debate itself, or maybe any of the recaps of the debate?
I got a look at plenty of the recaps and some of the clips. Didn't have an opportunity to tune in last night, but obviously saw a lot of the response, some of the news reports, obviously, and it's all over social media, obviously. So, look, I think all your points are exactly spot on. Excellent points on all counts, Melissa. And I do think it's, I don't know if it's fatal, but it's certainly interesting, the reactions we've seen. And I think we got Paul back in, so he'll be able to delve into these even more. But what I thought was a little bit fascinating is, as I was kind of scrolling through Twitter and seeing some reaction to some of this last evening, I just, by chance, I stumbled onto a tweet that I retweeted out this morning from John Stossel, who's a rather popular libertarian media figure here in the United States and has been for a long, long time, for decades. And it was about how he really much more trusts betting markets than he trusts pollsters or any other types of services or the media, et cetera, when it comes to kind of hashing out how elections might go. And I didn't realize this, but he actually runs a site, Stossel does, called electionbettingodds.com. And what he does with that site, with he and a partner, is it's kind of an aggregation site of places that do allow political betting, including, as Paul often alludes to, Betfair, which is great, along with Smarkets and PredictIt and some others. And I think what was fascinating was, if you look in the last week, just for Senate control, and again, this isn't specific to Pennsylvania, but obviously it matters. It's up to 65.8% on electionbettingodds.com for GOP Senate control. And that's a 10.4% increase since last week. In the last day, 5.2% of that increase is in the last day, the last 24 hours, basically. And almost 2% of that's down a little bit now. Just before we jumped on with this, it was almost 2% in like the last 4 hours. It's since declined. We've had 20 minutes of change, and it's amazing how fast these things update. But it's about 1.5% in just the last 4 hours. So it's fascinating to see that shift. It's and if you look at PredictIt, it's now showing Oz as a favorite there as well. 538 still is giving, if I saw this right, slightly favored to win the Senate are the Democrats. So it is fascinating to see the differences, but also just how fast this all changes and updates.
And Paul, are you back with us? You want to chime in on what happened as a result of the debate?
Well, I mean, what you're seeing here is a good example of the markets reacting instantly. And I mean, of course, that's the limit of polls. Polls are a snapshot. You can't transform a model immediately to respond to events of last night, whereas the market has. And I think the market is right to have moved, and I think that he is favourite now, Oz. However, and I think undoubtedly the Democrats have screwed up terribly here, and they should have put Conor Lamb in months ago. Really, they should have got on top of this, but they haven't. I mean, I backed GOP Senate control this morning, 65%. 60%, sorry, and I'll get out again if it goes 70%. It's a cover to my positions. But just to put, I mean, what I would say is just a bit of caution here. There has been a lot of early vote, and so it may well be that Fetterman's got a lot in the bag already. I can't think he gained many decides last night. But if you look at, for example, the YouGov poll yesterday, which was pretty favourable relatively to us anyway, and it was only 51-49, they stressed that there are very few reported self-declared independents and undecideds, and those there are lent heavily to Fetterman. So it's not a certainty by any means. Other little things, Everett Stern, who was the independent Republican in this race, he's withdrawn and endorsed Fetterman. He's saying he was on 3%. I don't think that's true at all. I think he was on 1% at best. But in a very close race, that could make a bit of difference. And finally, I'd also just say, I mean, look, the takeaway that Fetterman's stroke has definitely caused him major problems going forward. That was already factored into the market to a large extent with the move. And I would also say that Dr. Oz's lines on abortion have made big news today. So that is a good motivator for Democrats to come out. They probably needed that back in the national news. It might help, but I will still make him favourite, I think.
Yeah, and I think there are a couple of other things in Dr. Oz's favor. Well, and there has been a lot of early voting. I've seen 500,000 to 600,000 ballots cast already. But remember, their total turnout in the last off year, the last midterm election in 2018 was about 5 million. So that is still only about 10%. There are a lot of voters there that seem to have not yet cast their ballot based on the numbers that we have. The other thing that's different from Pennsylvania to Nevada. So in Nevada, for example, I think Republicans have a great shot there because there's other stuff on the ballot that's going to motivate those folks to get out and vote. Here's what's weird in Pennsylvania, and this is maybe a problem for Fetterman and may actually help Republicans as well. There's really nothing else on the ballot that's interesting. There's no statewide ballot measures. There's like 3 congressional races that are toss-ups, but for the most part, the congressional races throughout the state are pretty well ensconced. Like there's, I think, 17 or 18 seats, and only 3 of them are really in play. So, there's not a ton to sort of goose the turnout, as it were. Also, Governor Shapiro, in the governor's race, Shapiro seems to be fairly comfortably ahead. So if you're a Democrat and you're not really sure how you feel about Fetterman, maybe you don't necessarily have a ton of reason to run out and vote. I'll also point out probably the reason why you don't have as many independent voters in Pennsylvania is they have a very tight primary that is closed. So unless you are a registered member of a party, you cannot vote in the primary. Other states have different ways that they do this so that you could maybe go in and you can request a certain ballot. But that's Pennsylvania. If you're not a registered party member, you don't get to participate in the primary. And so I think that's part of why they have so few independent voters, because folks want to participate in the primary. So they jump in there, whether or not their heart is actually in it. So I think between last night's debate performance and given the other, things that aren't really there to motivate Democrat Party turnout, then the stats seem to be pretty accurate, and probably in a good spot to be betting that way, to be betting that Senate control sort of pinging off of a Pennsylvania win for Dr. Oz is probably a pretty good bet. I do want to also turn to, but it's not just Dr. Oz who's sort of getting a last minute, sort of boost in the ratings. We've seen a sort of across the board House races turning toward the GOP. And while there may not be many betting lines exactly on specific House races, there are lines that go to the sort of overall number of Democrats and Republicans in the House. So you guys want to bring us up to speed on what's happening in that sort of overall situation.
Okay, so there are a few individual races. We'll get to them later. But the main 3 things that we're betting on over here are to win the House, which is 91% Republicans, 9% Democrats, very one-sided. But the more interesting market is how many seats they'll get. So for the Democrats, 51% likelihood they get under 200. 200 to 209 is 23%, 210 to 19, 18%, and then 220 to 229, 8%. On the Republican side, 240 to 249 is 26%, 230 to 239 is 26%, 220 to 229 is 16%, 250 to 259 is 12%, 260 or more is 15%, or 210 to 19 is 7%. This, to me, is where I think the value lies. These are the markets to play. Just a warning regarding individual seats betting. I mean, there is one UK firm called Smarkets, which is a betting exchange, a peer-to-peer exchange. They're offering markets. And there's other stuff around in the global market with sports books. But as far as peer-to-peer exchanges, which are the best guides to creating a percentage, a genuine accurate percentage, these betting on districts is very niche. I would be skeptical how many players there are in these markets, especially how many are sharp. and it's not that easily getting a bet matched. So I will use these as a guide, the odds in those markets, but I wouldn't say they carry quite the same weight that we do, say, with the Senate or the bigger markets. I note too, I mean, also the forecasts here on 538, Sabato Crystal Ball, Cook Political Report. I think that's probably what most people are using, because that's really all we have, unless you're a real expert in those districts. But they change very fast and quite significantly. I mean, I'm trying to monitor it every day with 538, and it really does move around a lot. And just to say, I mean, if anybody wants more information about these individual races, where they can get on, what the latest prices are, feel free to direct message me on Twitter at Paul Motti, or comment on one of my pieces at politicalgambler.com, and I'll try and help you out.
Well, and it looks like, so currently Democrats have 220 seats in the House and Republicans have 212. So what the market is telling us, based on the numbers you just said, is that the shortest odds are on the Republicans taking about 30 seats. Is that
20?
20?
20 or more. That's
20
the
or
line.
more, right, exactly.
That's the line. That's the 50-50 line.
Okay, and Patrick, do you have any thoughts on what might be behind something like this?
Well, I love the way Paul breaks it down. I mean, you've got all these kind of sections of how this is going to break down, the 240 to 249, 230 to 239, and kind of making your way down, and then that extraordinary high point of 250 to 259 if there was something exceptional, and then the actual lowest point, that 210 to 219, which basically represents the longest shot, right, Paul? Is that a fair way to put that?
Yeah.
The longest shot is that would be the minimum that the GOP would hold, which would be somewhere between a modest minority, as they are now, and a very slim majority, right?
Well, they need 218 to win. So if they hit that 210 to 219, they've probably lost it.
Right, exactly. So it's just really interesting the way it breaks down, and it gives bettors a whole lot of ranges. I mean, you can look at those percentages and kind of, you might be able to find a nice little bet in the middle of all that there. Not way out at 250 to 259, not way in at 210 to 219, where you can find some value on that in the places where political betting is legal, of course. But fortunately, like I said, we bring Paul in. He's got a bevy of experience, and I think it's fascinating the way he breaks it down and the way the numbers, kind of the way they shift so quickly, as you both have noted. But B, how this might ultimately play out in the next couple of weeks. I think I just think as far as on the House side, as Paul alluded to, it seems much more cut and dried. 538 is now got Republicans taking the House in basically their model, 81 out of 100 ways that they've simulated this, run a simulation. So 81%, predicted has got it at 80, priced at 89 cents. And then what I alluded to earlier, this site I just stumbled onto yesterday. I can't believe I hadn't seen it sooner, but this electionbettingodds.com that John Stossel puts together, he's got that at 87%. And that's, I'm just looking to see if there's been much. That's up 3% over the last week. Hasn't moved much over the last day or two, but that's up 3% over the last week. I mean, it seems, much like DeSantis in Florida, it's slam dunk status, and really your opportunities there aren't so much, making a bet that the GOP will control the House. The opportunities there are in some of those other markets that Paul noted. If where you have a range, how many seats will the Dems have? What will the range of Dem seats be? Or what will the range of GOP seats be? That's where the opportunities are, not so much with the, with the yes, no on, or with the yes, who's going to control, GOP or Dem. It doesn't seem like the opportunity is there as much as it is in these sub-markets. Is that a fair way to summarize it, Paul?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right.
And we've had a couple of specific races that have popped up where it seems like Democrats might have felt comfortable. Maybe they moved money elsewhere, and now all of a sudden they're scrambling to put resources into congressional races that had not previously been on the radar. And I'm thinking of, for example, New York's District 17, where we've got a Maloney running, who's the chairman of the DCCC. So he's the person who doles out the money for other people's campaigns, and suddenly he is in some trouble. Some polls showing his Republican challenger actually gaining ground. So now there's a scramble to allocate money to that race. A couple of races in Oregon where Biden won by just double digits in one district and by 9 points in the other district, and yet Republicans in both of those places really bringing things to a very, very tight place in the polls. And so there does seem to be some movement, to your point, Patrick, not necessarily on whether or not the Republicans will take the House, but the extent to which they will. And there seems to be some momentum shifting toward the Republicans here. What's your sense of it? Is it inflation? I know in Oregon, one of the big issues is crime, based on what they've seen in Portland and maybe even in their own communities. And in New York, it seems to be crime as well, being a big factor there, as we've sort of got Maloney was on record saying he's in favor of eliminating cash bail. He said that a few years ago, and now that's basically playing on a loop, since that's what people think is really driving some of the crime statistics in New York right now, is the elimination of cash bail. So crime seems to be something that's coming to the forefront, and maybe also inflation. What's your take on why the gap has grown here as we get into the home stretch?
I think those 2 points there, crime, inflation, I've seen, and maybe others have seen in the past week or two also, that there are in a couple of these races that were either tight or have suddenly tightened up a little bit, where perhaps the Democrats still have the advantage, but not nearly as comfortable. There have been a couple of Democrats over the past couple of weeks who have, I wouldn't say advocated, but certainly, and who knows what any, GOP, Democrat, Independent, everybody in between, who knows how these people actually act after they win. That's always the question. And it's a really good question, because they don't always do after they win what they leaned toward in order to get to the finish line, in order to get across the finish line. But school choice has also been a big issue in many states. And when you're talking about the House, this is the people, this is the very more representative, because there's so many districts and so many small areas, and in some areas of one state it may be a really important issue, and in others it may not be. But there have been some Democrats that have sort of said, hey, maybe we are a little more open to this question of school choice, or at least looking into how public education is done. So it's fascinating that they would even make that modest concession in these final days, these last 2 weeks. So I think that's playing into it too. I think there's no doubt about that. I'll throw in here too, just that we have noted, as Melissa noted at the top and at the end of every episode, that political betting is not legal in the United States. It's very legal in the United Kingdom, and very much so, as Paul will attest. The Brits really enjoy betting on American politics, and I'm sure they're enjoying it right now. I'm sure they're partaking, and they really partake in the presidential elections. But just recently, Canada legalized single game, basically legalized sports betting. They used to basically have kind of a parlay thing that you were allowed to do that was sports betting, but very much tilted toward the House. It's now, at least in Ontario, you are allowed to bet. Well, you're allowed to bet across the country on sports. In Ontario, you are allowed to bet on U.S. politics, and DraftKings actually has odds up. So right across the border, you can bet on U.S. politics legally in a regulated fashion with a brand that everybody knows, but you can't do it here yet. I did reach out to DraftKings on this, and just looking at speaking to the House of Representatives. Again, it's like everywhere else. It's Lance, it's very tilted odds, minus 2,000 in favor of Republicans, plus 700 that the Democrats retain control of the House. They don't have too many of these specific races. They do in the Senate, But for the House, it's just basically who will have control. And
if you're an American and you cross the border into Ontario, can you bet on politics in Ontario? Just
I don't
asking
think you
for a friend.
Absolutely. Well, Paul can speak to this too. I mean, I know Americans who fly over to the UK to be able to bet on politics. And I would assume you could do the same thing. As long as you're there, as long as you are in the geo-fenced area in which that bet is allowed to take place, geo-fenced if you're on your phone or literally if you're at the bookmaker, if you're at the retail, the brick and mortar sports book or betting operation, then yes, you can bet there. The issue is you have to get back there to cash it. So probably that could be difficult cashing out, but absolutely you can go, and people do. And again, Paul could speak to that too, but just to, with that DraftKings odds, again, tilted as we noted before on the House of Representatives with Predict It and electionbettingodds.com. And even at 538, minus 2,000 to the Republicans means you'd have to bet $2,000 to win $100. Plus 700 on the Democrats means you bet 100, you could win 700. However, the likelihood of that happening is extremely small, at least in terms, at least if you were to believe the odds makers and also some of these election prediction sites.
Okay. And Paul, I know you wanted to touch on this a little bit more before we go. So why don't you let us know? I know you had said that you felt like the red wave, as it were, might be a little overhyped, maybe that it won't be as big of a sweep as some folks are predicting.
Well, yeah, let's just get into the maths of this first of all, right? So looking at the current lists using an array of forecasting models, I think this is the basic numbers I've got. 210 definite Republicans, or not definite, lean, likely, or solid Republican seats. 180 to win Democrats, lean, likely, or solid. Then there's 36 toss-ups. Out of those 36 toss-ups, the Democrats are, according to the 538 forecast, they're ahead in 24 of them, and Republicans are on 12. So if the favourite won in every race, the result would be 213 to the Democrats, 222 to the Republicans. But let's break that down a bit further. Of the 12 Republican toss-ups, only 3 are below 60%, and another 4 are below 70%. So you would fully expect them to get at least another 7 there. For the Democrats, only 10 of their ones, they're ahead of below 60%, and a further 7 are below 70%. I personally think if you're up to 60, 65%, it's very unlikely to go wrong. Now, just get basically the Betfair odds have 200 as the line. I think that is too much. I think that the red wave, the Republicans are going to win. I'm very confident about that. But I don't believe there's really red wave in quite the way that it's being presented. So first of all, before we dismiss the polls, let's remember that the last standalone midterm elections, 2018, they were spot on, absolutely spot on. So if there was a systemic pro-Democrat bias, as opposed to an anti-Trump bias, which we would have seen in 2020, then it would have overshot the Democrat lead in 2018, and it didn't. In the last week, the generic ballot polls have swung a bit towards Democrats, ranging between +2 and +5. In 2020, they won by 3.1%. So that doesn't tell me that there's going to be a massive change. It's not that clear that redistricting has particularly benefited one side this time. Certainly the effects count both ways. I'd also note how badly Trump is polling in 2024, when he's very much the face of the Republican Party. That doesn't strike me as a Republican wave. There's also a known unknown is what's happening in the Republican Party amongst their supporters, if there is any backlash to this, to Trumpism, to January the 6th, etc. Liz Cheney is polling at 3% in Republican primary polls, and that's very low considering she's not a candidate yet, right? That probably means she has higher support. If that is 5%, 7%, that's a big number for the Republicans to lose in an ultra-partisan environment. As I say, they're on low 40s in the generic ballot. That doesn't point to a wave. If you compare that to the Democrats in 2018, they were 50 plus regularly. One other thing that may be relevant or not, but Michael Moore, someone to my great cost, I ignored in 2016, right? When Michael Moore was like the only person on the left saying Trump's going to win this, right? I know the Midwest. He is a guy who speaks to people. He's not a pollster. I've never seen Michael Moore more confident in my life about a set of midterms. He's adamant that there is this massive enthusiasm, there is momentum. Now, I don't think that's enough to turn around the fundamentals of inflation and crime, as you say, and just the general midterm reaction to the incumbent. But I don't think we're going to see a true red wave. So the bets I'm going to put up this week are two bets. First of all, back the Democrats to get 200 or more seats at 49% on Betfair. And secondly, in those bands for the Republican Party, 220 to 229, that's only at 15%. That strikes me as a very cheap buy. The forecast I laid out before, they had them on 222. So you've got seven extra on top of that. And I think it will trade a lot higher than 15% as we get closer.
Okay. So just for listeners out there, thanks to redistricting, it looks like Republicans picked up about 3 seats, mostly because people moved into states like Florida and Texas since the 2010 census. So they actually picked up seats, and the Republicans in those places do some of the districting, and so they were able to district themselves a couple of extra seats. So it looks like a net 3 to Republicans based on redistricting. And Paul, you hit on this a bit, but Patrick, I don't know if you're there on your computer where you can see what is going on with Trump 2024, because he's been quiet about whether he's going to run again, although now he is starting to drop some hints. We've got reports that he is tapping an operative in Virginia to help him run a campaign for 2024. At least, it's super early on, but what are, what are the odds about him winning either the nomination or the presidency this far out?
Right. And Paul may have something more handy than I do. I'm not seeing, I'm looking at, I don't know if PredictIt has this right now, but I'm not seeing it on electionbettingodds.com or on 538 at the moment. But on electionbettingodds.com right now, the chance that he runs is at 75%, which is interesting, to say the least. I think, seeing how things turn out in a couple of weeks might impact that to some degree. But it's certainly interesting that just the percentages here that seem to indicate he will run in 2024. Whether he should is another question that's certainly very much a point of contention and a good point of debate. So I don't have any odds in front of me. I don't know if Paul has anything in front of me. I know the British markets have this stuff. They're looking at 2024. They were probably looking at 2024 the minute they finalized the 2020 election, right? They don't mess around.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like within an hour, right?
Love it. Love it.
There's a difference actually between America and Britain. So on PredictIt, Trump is around about 2-1 chances, about 33% to be the nominee. He's joint with DeSantis, whereas in the UK, he's more like 45, 47%, and DeSantis would be about 28%. To win the presidency, he is around about 21% over here, and DeSantis is about 18%.
Yeah, that's fascinating stuff. And I love that they get into it, right out of the gate. Melissa, if I can, I want to throw something at Paul real quick that just kind of circles back real quickly to what we were talking about earlier when we we're going through the whole Pennsylvania thing. Paul, do you have to consider with U.S. politics and this is kind of specific to the Fetterman Oz race, but that Pennsylvania has 44 days of early betting, and we just finally had a debate literally 2 weeks out that maybe changes the dynamic for the next 2 weeks. But prior to that, you basically had a month plus or a month of early voting, which I think the thought is that in Pennsylvania and other states that normally tends to benefit the Democratic side. Is that something you kind of have to look at as you look at odds and determine how you pursue that race you know, there was kind of in a sense, there was kind of a run out the clock strategy here that may work. He may have banked enough votes in the last 30 days to where I wouldn't say last night is inconsequential. I think it's totally consequential, but enough so to offset 30 days of votes in the bank. And I understand, Melissa, what you're saying with it's only a fraction, but this is a race that may be decided by a fraction.
We do. Look, it's something you have to consider. But what I would say is that you really can't rely on the information of numbers who have voted, which way they've voted. I mean, we've seen this so many times where, you know, one side gets really excited. Usually the Democrats getting very excited because there's big early voting numbers somewhere. And it doesn't pan out that way. And given that, you know, how much this has developed in recent years, I mean, look at the numbers in Georgia, right? Massive early voting numbers there.
Right.
Does that mean that the Democrats are going to overperform it? Or does it just mean that the Democrats were very good at utilising the early vote last time and the Republicans are catching up now?
Yeah, we'll keep looking into that. I also want to maybe next week talk about Governor DeSantis, because I wonder if he's a Scott Walker kind of character where, you know, he's this person where everyone thinks he's going to be the next big thing. And then the minute he gets under the spotlight, he wilts a bit. And it looks like the UK betting markets are discounting him a little more than the US exchange is, and maybe are seeing something more clearly that we're not seeing here when it comes to his ability to really go toe to toe with someone like Donald Trump or some of the other candidates up in the Republican Party. We'll keep our eye on that. But we do need to wrap it up here. So that's our show for the week. Thanks so much for listening. Don't forget to send us your questions at VegasInsider@bettercollective.com. As a reminder, betting on politics is not permitted in the US and even in some places in Europe. This podcast is for informational purposes only. We encourage all gamblers out there to check out a variety of sources. Thanks again for listening. We will see you next week.